From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi again and welcome to the show. Well, it's Thanksgiving season, and since a lot of our viewers might be among the people who are going to have to work on Thanksgiving Day because their benevolent employer down at the big box store has decided that it's just not profitable to have the store dark when people want to buy toys, well, we've decided to present our Thanksgiving show a week early just for you because we really do want to make a little list of the things that we're thankful for at this point in the year. And despite all the mayhem around us, we really do have some things to be thankful for today. So it is our State of the City address. And I've asked an old friend to come by and talk with us, and that friend is Lee Bey, who I've been struggling to try to figure out how to introduce you, other than that you have the longest resume of anybody I know. You worked for the city. You've been an architecture critic. You've been in the architecture business. You've done just about everything, and you're a blogger, you're a journalist, and blah, blah, blah. So
exactly.
What I really would like to say is that you're one of the people that I believe just knows a lot about a lot. And so what the hell? Let's have you,
why not?
Let's just sit and talk.
That's right.
So, we're going to run this show for 2 weeks. So if you have broken away from the family, if today's Thanksgiving Day and you've broken away from the family at 6:30 because you really want to watch Chicago Newsroom, I hope you weren't watching last week because it's a rerun. We're going to run it for a couple weeks. Anyway, the point of that is that this is a really great time to sit back and just kind of have a general conversation about things. Mm-hmm. And your specialty is, of course, architecture. I guess that's fair to say, right?
That's fair to say.
You were the architecture critic for the Sun-Times, and you were a special assistant to Mayor Daley for a long time, working in City Hall on his development and architecture issues. So let's just start with the little things and move up to there. Just yesterday, we saw the Concordia Evangelical Lutheran Church lose its steeple. And I don't really know the details of this other than what I've read in the press this morning, but apparently they lowered the steeple to the ground and then smashed it to smithereens and dumped it in a dumpster. And some of the congregation were hoping that maybe in some way it could have been saved, which brings us, of course, to architectural preservation. And something you've written about more than anybody I know is preservation of religious buildings.
Very important. I mean, a very important but often overlooked kind of alley of preservation. Churches were built, unlike other buildings, by corporations and rich people. Churches were built by regular folk like you and I, for the most part. Particularly, either coming up from the South or coming from the old country in Europe, and they brought a little bit of that with them in the design and the construction of the church. So you hate to see that kind of thing happen. With this church, of course, the steeple was compromised with the big storms we had over the weekend. But all things considered, and given what happens to churches around this city pretty routinely, the steeple can be rebuilt if the church chooses to. And it's it isn't like one of the grand Gothic cathedral-like steeples where it's made out of limestone and it's such a part of the church that to have it gone would really take away from the look of the church, or to manufacture it again would be tough. This one was made out of, if it wasn't wood, it was out of some simple materials.
From the picture in this, it looked like it was just like 2x4s and sheathing and some shingle roofing on it or something. It didn't look like it was anything terribly. Well, anyway, but
so it can be remade.
But the point that you're talking about, though, I think is really critical. Is this thing about religious buildings and how we went through this period, obviously in the 50s and the 60s, where we were just ripping down everything wholesale, but churches were kind of, I think, largely exempt from that, weren't they? Because they had
built highways around them.
Oh, by the way.
Look at Andrew Patner. That's what I get for being early the last time.
Good to see you, man.
Good to see you.
We started without you because we weren't sure you were going to come, but here you are, and we're glad to have you. Andrew Patner, ladies and gentlemen, Sun-Times, WFMT, old friend of the show. Glad to have you here.
Old friend of Lee's.
Old friend of Lee's. So, yeah, you get the idea. We've already told you. We're doing our Thanksgiving armchair show, talking about the state of the city, blah, blah, blah. So, Isn't that true? I mean, what we're seeing is a lot of these churches are deteriorating now because they're just being unused or being less used.
You know what's happening is in many cases is this. Not in the case of this one, which I think the church is used. It's just the storm affected it. But what's been happening over the past 15 or 20 years is that in many parts of the city, congregations are moving to larger churches that they build themselves, and they're leaving behind these kind of older churches. Smaller congregations then move into them and find them very difficult to take care of. And unlike heat exactly, and unlike commercial buildings, I mean, there really isn't a preservation mechanism. Like you don't give money. There isn't a tax break. They've already got it, right? The churches already have. They don't pay property taxes, and there aren't sort of like civic or public grants that you can give. Like no TIF money really can go to the preservation of a church. So as a result,
Rod Blagojevich thought that he could.
When Pilgrim burnt up, and it turns out that even he couldn't give them money, and some other entity got it, $1 million when Pilgrim Baptist burnt up about 7 or 8 years ago. So these buildings, are in a tough spot, and they're really but when they're saved, they're things of beauty. I mean, you can see with Holy Family, which is almost lost, maybe 20 years ago or so on Roosevelt near St. Ignatius. But we really find ourselves in an interesting spot. What to do with these churches, and now
the same social forces that meant that Richard J. Daley and the planners did not take the churches down when they would take other. You have an expressway that moves so that every Polish church is still along
the Kennedy
curve. But that same social force, which was when those people left those communities, and when people's religious attendance overall in traditional churches went down, means these wonderful, beautiful structures that, as you were both saying earlier, are related to the ethnic history and the racial history and economic history of the city are in trouble.
You mentioned Holy Family, and I remember doing a story on that about 20 years ago when they were first talking about renovating it, and I got to go in and just kind of sit in the sanctuary. I mean, you can hear the dripping water and the plaster is falling off the ceiling. It was horrible. But there is something so spiritual about a consecrated place like that, where thousands and thousands of people have been, they've had wedding ceremonies, confirmations, funerals in there, and all of those people are still hanging around.
There are a number of people who've been involved with this, but and I'm not saying this to butter him up, because there's nothing I need to get from Lee.
That's right.
Lee has nothing.
Nothing I have.
But Lee Bey, when he began his work as an architecture critic at the Sun-Times on through today, has really focused, in addition to everything else, on two very important areas that we now see as important. Religious structures in churches and mid-20th century architecture. And he has helped to bring those things before the Chicago public, and I think the national public.
And lest we make Lee just kind of float away from the table here. Also, I think it's really important that Lee has introduced us to the concept that there are architecturally significant buildings outside of the Loop.
Oh, well, absolutely.
In other parts of the city,
and the Loop battles had also been fought, but that he's brought it back to our everyday lives.
Well, so I walked past Prentice yesterday, and I see that the scaffolding is finally going up around the, whatever you call the daisy of the building, and they're chipping away at the very top of it, so it's on its way out.
Yes, it is. And and it's sort of a sad end to a years-long battle to preserve this building by Bertrand Goldberg. It's always been a funny thing in that of Goldberg's buildings, this one was not my favorite. And which doesn't mean it didn't deserve preservation or I didn't like it, but there are better examples of his work, I think. But it's tough to see it come down. And also recently, the Northwestern has released renderings of at least the 3 finalists in their bake-off for the building they're going to pick to replace the building. And I wrote a few days ago that when you see what they proposed, what's being proposed and what they're considering, you also see the reason why Prentice was never going to be saved.
I think you're right, and Blair Kamen wrote similarly about that. But
I did it first.
You did it first.
You did.
Lee did it first.
No, I'm teasing. I think actually Blair did do it first.
All right.
But I think one of the things
your spelling was better.
That's right.
One of the
I
things
use simpler words. That's my thing.
One of the things that got pointed out in there that I was kind of surprised Northwestern didn't make this point earlier, because it might have made their case a little bit easier to swallow for the public, is this notion that this building was really almost a kind of like a big old add-on to the existing research building to the, to the east or to the west or something, because the specifications were that this new building has to meet at every floor.
Oh, but I'm sorry, I think
that
that just is nonsense from beginning to end. Northwestern doesn't care where the building is. They want to control the entire area. And while the Prentice battle was going on, they tore down 3 more blocks of buildings. So research doesn't work. How many people who win the Nobel Prize for physics from 2 different countries who were collaborating daily over the phone and the internet have offices that align floor by floor? And by the time the building is built, there'll be a whole other model for that. No, this is pure land grab. Doesn't mean that Prentice could have been converted to their uses, that may be, but given that you now see the better side of the building because of all the blocks that were torn down, and you say, well, that's actually not such a bad building. No, this was typical, as I always say with architecture battles, when you hear an organization say, we have looked at everything and there is no alternative, that means there are so many alternatives, this is what we want. I'm sorry on that one.
Well, it's nice to have Andrew here to speak the truth.
I don't know about truth, but to be loud and
All right, so we started off without you, Andrew, but I think the place we really need to start, we mentioned earlier that we want this to be our kind of state of the city and our small list of things that we really do have to be grateful for at Thanksgiving.
Okay.
And one of them happened yesterday, I would assume. As a new inductee in the Gay and Lesbian Hall of Fame in Chicago, you must have been very happy with Governor
I think
Quinn.
The point, as Neil Steinberg makes in the Sun-Times today, is that it's not a question of whether people who are gay or lesbian or whatever are happy. It's the state. This isn't when the Civil Rights Act was passed, it was not, quote, a victory for blacks. It was a victory for America. And I think
although it did help blacks, I just want to say that.
Also,
I do want to underscore that.
There was, it was not only.
That's right. It was an American victory, but if you're a black American, it really was a victory.
Of course,
if I were a black person on that day, I would have been very happy.
Yes.
I think
I see your point.
Right. Right. And I do think it's important too to note that this was a state law and a state victory, and not a city law and a city victory. And with all these politicians jostling to be up on the stage, some of whom through their tenor maybe had some contribution, but should have been Greg Harris, Tony Preckwinkle, Jim and Pat, the couple who've been together for 50 years, and a song, and that would have been fine. But no, it is significant. It's significant that it took too much time in a state that had been 40 years ahead in the past. But it's significant that by the time it happened, all the religious blarney had faded away, except for exorcisms and the latest twist and turn of this. Can't wait to retire Cardinal George. I mean, I say that he has to retire. I think it's this coming year, but I wish him long life and good health. But except for that, the debate was over. It was only politics, i.e. Republicans, 3 only, could bring themselves. And one even said on the floor, it was because his mother-in-law is a lesbian, and what was he going to tell his kids? We don't want Granny to have rights, It was only political, and it was only personal, and then it was done. But that's not what the rest of the country faces. They face evangelicals, they face continued prejudice. It will fade in time.
I think everyone agrees with that sentiment. So at least statistically, we made it into the first third.
Yes, correct. Exactly. I was thinking the same thing.
Here. Yeah.
I was at the opera last night. It was getting dull, and I started calculating 16 out of 50, 51
16,
really.
32,
if you
48.
Count, right?
Yeah.
So what was your perspective, Lee?
It's funny. I mean, I took umbrage over the idea that marriage equality threatens marriage as an institution, and I say that in all frank honesty as a man who's divorced from a heterosexual marriage. And I think if one wants to count up threats to marriage, divorce to be able to
more people getting married is not one of those
exactly
threats.
exactly and that divorce is a thing that I don't it was a tough decision to make, but you can do it, and you can do it legally in this town. So I guess I'm in this nation. So I guess I'm saying is that I don't see. I never fully. I mean, I
never got that part of the argument.
Yeah, I never got that, and that people should just be honest. If they don't want to see two guys or two ladies married, just say that. I don't like that. I find that reprehensible.
Right.
But don't hide behind.
But don't make it an argument that it's
But in the end, that actually backfired.
Yeah, it did.
In the end, Cardinal George is one of the people who passed this law because it was so crazy, the things that he was saying.
Yeah.
And people were saying, well, wait, I don't see that with my niece, my sister, myself, my priest.
Right.
I don't see that. The other thing that I think we have to note before moving on is the effort to blame the blacks finally was shown to be a fraud. This idea that black people don't believe in, well, first of all, being gay is not a white thing, and one of the most amazing things, unfortunately, because of some things I wasn't expecting, I couldn't go to the thing and I couldn't see the live webcast. But what I tuned in at the end and then when I looked at the tape, the open to the public aspect meant that UIC forum was filled with black and Latino young people and couples, the invisible people. And the point, this idea, the black churches, those were paid off pastors. It was a manipulation of Cardinal George, and thank goodness for Greg Harris for singling out B. Herbert Martin, who has been there from the 70s on, has never wavered. They've called him, that was Harold Washington's pastor, they've called him every name in the book, but when it came down to it, it was done.
Yeah, I despise the fact that in here and in California a few years ago that somehow this idea of black homophobia becomes the kind of the trope, the kind of thing that gets it's Westboro Church. I mean which is not a black church.
No.
These are the people who are the ones who are the first line offenders, the first line fighters against equality like this, and but it's typical. When things go bad, often, or if there's a way minorities can be blamed for it, it happens.
I blame black people for the stock market in Wall Street.
Sooner or later, right?
If they had
an odd person gets elected to office, right? They'll say, particularly if he's a Democrat, well, it's. Those people, they voted for him. It's a strange thing.
If they hadn't invented those stock swaps.
I was glad to see that finally begin to fall away.
It just fell away. The woman from Decatur, I mean, that was a sign that you have a black representative from Decatur where there are church views and so on, and she just says enough. And that was it. Yeah. Nobody jumped on her.
All right. I would like
gratitude, Thanksgiving, yes.
Yes, you would put that on your list.
Sure.
I'll put it on mine.
Yeah,
okay. So and I guess I'm grateful for the fact that there are in the culture that we have that is rapidly deteriorating into hell in a handbasket, there are still some people who want to get married.
Exactly. So I'm not one of them anymore. I tell you that. But Andrew, man, have at it, brother.
People are saying. I mean, I don't know. I have a very happy 24-year unmarried relationship. But you see, but the serious part is, divorced or not, Lee has 3 amazing adult daughters.
Soon to be adult.
Adult and young adult daughters. And until recently, that was the real sticking point was, had this happened 25 years ago, I would have a family now. There's no question.
Yeah.
I love children, and that was the only thing that really disturbed my parents when I came out to them was, but you would be such a great dad.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean, of course, people have had kids and are having them, but it would have been a much different thing, and you'll see it as a much more part of the norm. And of course, those of us who see kids in school and so on, who have parents of all kinds, know there's absolutely no difference in parenting quality.
Yeah.
Just a lower divorce rate because it's new. But
it'll catch up.
It'll catch up.
It'll definitely catch up. I don't know. I'm at a loss here. I don't know whether we should. I had mentioned to Lee before you got here that I would put on my list of things that I think we should be grateful for the fact that, okay, Ventra aside, the CTA has had a pretty good year with the reconstruction of the Red Line that went off pretty much flawlessly. The ridership is up. And now, yesterday, they just got this huge grant from the federal government to begin the process of rebuilding the whole north end all the way up to
Wait,
Wilmette.
the federal government, the source of all evil other
yes,
than blacks and
those-
gay people?
Right.
It's number two.
Those-
yeah. It's blacks,
Yeah,
federal government,
right,
and then
right.
gay
Okay,
people.
all right.
Some federal bureaucrat somewhere said, yes, Mr. Emanuel, you can have the money. So I was mentioning to Lee that on this show, I will admit it, dear viewer, we sometimes tend to be critical of our mayor. And we've said some kind of deprecating things about him. But there's one thing that I think you got to give the guy credit for. He loves that rapid transit system, man, and he has been finding money for it. I don't know how he's been doing it, but between his connections and Claypool's connections, they've been pulling in a lot of money. And all new cars for the L's and new stations, new 95th station.
Yeah. It's so true. And he spread it out throughout the system. Ventura, Ventura is like the log on the table, right? How's that for an artful way to keep us on TV without, in many respects, because it's the thing. But sadly, it does overshadow some phenomenal things happening in the city. But the other thing is that this mayor rides the L. The previous mayor, who we worked for, and I like him and still do, he didn't ride the L. And
he knew that it was there, though. He had heard about it.
Yeah, he heard it, and when it went past, I'm sure he heard the rumble of it. But he wasn't riding the L, and I think that makes the difference. And I also think that if you want to have a vital downtown, that the way to do it is not to have us clogged up with cars and paying Lord knows what it costs to park downtown, but to have a rapid transit system. And I think that the last mayor heard it from the business community. I think
you can say his name. That's one of the other rules on this show. We can say Mayor Daley on this show.
I think the previous mayor. I don't know why I got in the habit of saying that, right?
Because that's what Ron says.
That's right.
The previous
mayor.
Right.
But
some of it is generational.
But here's what I'm wrong. But this is what I think. You're right. It is generational. He is younger. And I think that Ram is younger. But I think that the business community is being able to say to Ram, we need these things to work. We need to get people downtown. The population of a small city comes downtown to work and leaves at night.
And it's got to work.
And it's got to work. It's got to work.
I think that it's generational, and to a certain extent, there's an aspect of class here. Jane Byrne was not born poor by any means. She wasn't born rich, but as a working woman and as a single mother, remember the good side of Jane Byrne. I know it was only a brief window, but she'd been the cab commissioner or consumer affairs commissioner. And the two things she came in right away, well, the one got very scandalized, but still, she wanted to do something about transportation, and she also wanted to break the deal with the cab companies that meant we didn't have an L to O'Hare or from O'Hare. That was Jane M. Byrne.
Yeah.
That's why it opened, and Washington said so. It opened under Harold. But she was the one who went to the feds and everybody. And that went back to cartage cabals and so on, going back before Richard J. Daley. But I think that if you have people who ride the L or take the bus, and we have to remember that, love him or hate him, whatever, Richard M. Daley is a Kennedy of Chicago. That whole family is. They've got murder trials, the Skakels, the Vanekos, But I mean, they don't know what it is to do. It's not even their fault. It's their parents' fault, you could say. They don't know what it is to put one foot in front of the other without people pushing them, getting them into a car, whatever. And that's the same for the Kennedys. So I mean, I'm being bipartisan within the Democratic Party.
But I mean,
Rom gets that part of it.
Do you agree that it's fair to say that you can't say Ventura aside, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But apart from that, don't you think they've had a pretty good year?
Oh yeah, definitely. Again, as you mentioned, getting the red line. I mean, it was controversial that the red line closed up for those 5 or 6 months. Right. But the thing opens up and the trains run the way they ought to. Yeah. And there's new money for the north side.
A year from now,
what is the sense that you get from if you had a chance to pull it? But I mean, just even from your moving up and down the city as you do you have a sense from the people who lived on the south side or live in the areas where it was closed for 6 months, that are they happy now, or they? Or
how would he know? He rides the Metro.
Well,
That's
know
true,
that.
But I still live on the south side, far south side, too. I live in Pullman. I get a sense that they had to grin and bear it during that time, but the results are better. I tell you what, as a Metro rider, I feel Metro has fallen behind.
Right. That's the thing.
Severely.
Right. Yeah. Definitely.
Compared to the CTA.
Yeah, more
Definitely.
and
as a
believe it or not,
rider
more scandalous.
Well,
yeah.
A scandal that was not a city of Chicago scandal.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, do you want to spend a minute talking about this Ventra thing? We've hardly talked about it on the show. It's like, is it analogous to healthcare.gov? Is it just something that...
I think it's completely analogous, but I'm sure Lee knows much more about it.
You know, I think, well, maybe a hair more about it, if anything. You know, it is. I mean, it isn't like the parking meter deal, I hope, which I think is an outright scam. This is a thing that if it does work, is potentially a good thing for the city. And we got to, you know, we complain about it, but the thing about it is that, you know, this comes out of laws, right? That I think the state legislature passed that, you know, that demands sort of like a one fare system for
which is a good thing
for the region, which is a good thing. I got a paper metro ticket in my pocket, had to put more money in CT to get over here. The two things don't get together.
Right.
So this is a way to
remember
kind of fix
the RTA?
Yeah.
40 years ago, it was going to unify all those systems.
And you know, I was 7 at the time, and now I'm like, you know, I'm looking for my AARP card. It still hasn't happened yet. So you know, so you know, if they can work this thing out, and you know, and the mayor and Forrest and also the CTA president Terry Peterson, you know, they said, look, you know, Cubitt isn't going to get a dime out of the deal until this thing gets fixed, which probably does put a little bit of the onus on them to get it fixed.
Do you remember when early modern office phone systems came in? And somebody would come in and make a presentation, and they'd have it all set up like the Museum of Science and Industry phone room, and they'd show you this, and everyone would say, "Great," and your boss would buy it, and then it would come in, and within a few days you realized it wasn't you, it didn't work. So we've now seen so many wonderful things from technology.
That's a good analogy.
And
I think we've all had,
of
a certain age,
but we've all seen
that.
these things come, and I think that's why it is exactly the same as the healthcare website. These people, it's like the computer does us no wrong. You've got yours there. You might have yours in your pocket. Mine's in my bag. It looks things up for us. It tends not to crash and so on. So if somebody comes along and makes a presentation, it doesn't mean that they're venal or that there's but they think it's going to work. But you haven't tested it on 3 million people or 300 million people.
It's hard to beta
test. So we need to remember that we have some awe here that has to trust but verify. That was a GOP statement.
Yes, it was. It was. So we are applying the tyranny of this rule that we're doing our Thanksgiving show here, and we got 2 minutes left. So you each have 1 minute to tell me something that you think that you're really happy about. Okay, folks. Thanks for watching.
Right.
I will say
I've never seen these two guys fall silent before.
I know, right?
I will say this, and I don't mean it only to imply that there are so many negative things going on with our city right now or to our city. But I will say this, when Aaron Freeman and I had our programs on WBEZ, the station that Ken had run before that, we used to say every Saturday, make sure that you see the lake every day, whether you are commuting, jogging, whether you live in Norwich. Find a way to see Buckingham Fountain once a week when it's on, and the lake every day. And thank goodness that whatever else is going on, even the concretization has paused. You know, I just think we have such a beautiful location for our city, and that's the thing that I'm really happy about.
Andrew ate up your 2 minutes. I'm sorry.
I'll second what he said.
Good.
How about that?
You got to start anyway.
I'm sorry. Came
Lee
late
Bey.
and ate his seconds.
Lee Bey, journalist, Man About Town. Andrew Patner, Man About Town, WFMT and the Sun-Times, and you've been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a community service of CAN TV. Watch us right here anytime you like on iTunes, and we will see you again after Thanksgiving, and happy Thanksgiving to you. We'll catch you next time on CAN TV. CAN TV, can do. Good night.